Hey, friend. Happy Wednesday. So good to see you. You might realize that this is not my typical background. We had a long holiday here in the US, and I decided to keep it going because it already hit 100 degrees in Austin, Texas, where I live. So, for anybody who's joining us, that's like a little over 38 Celsius, and it's only May, which means we haven't even hit June, and we definitely haven't hit July, and we definitely haven't hit the hottest, which is August. So I don't know what that says for my forecast of the summer, other than to really load up on sunscreen and cross my fingers and hope for the best. So I am joining today from Colorado, where the temperature is a bit more pleasant, but would love to hear where you are joining in from. If you're new here, you might already notice that the chat is kind of the place to be. Of course, you can sit back, you can relax, you can listen to Lorraine and I dish and chat and talk about tips and tricks and strategies. That's fine. You can do that. However, if you yourself have questions, have comments, or have tips and strategies of your own, sharing is caring, my friend. So we would like to hear what that is. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it with everybody else. If you are listening to this on your favorite podcast network while you walk the dog or do the dishes or do the laundry, never fear. All of the things that we talk about today, we will include in the chat. And if you remember from last week, there were tons of great recommendations of books to read and podcasts to listen to. I had a lot of homework coming out of that. I'm sure you did it as well. You can always cheat and go back and look at the podcast notes and see all of those recommendations that were put in. But one of the things that I am always looking for when I'm looking for podcast recommendations, for book recommendations, for me specifically, is things that are actionable. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes I read stories that are like, fun and magical and fictional and have fairies and dragons, and those are great. And sometimes I read books that are more like biographies about Eliza Hamilton and, Alexander Hamilton's wife, and that's super interesting. But when I'm reading a business book, I want to take actionable advice from there. I want to take something that I have read and be like, okay, I can implement this in my life tomorrow. And maybe not tomorrow, but at least in the coming weeks, something to try, something to do. And that's just how I like to read. And what I have realized about you and about so many of us here is that you also like those things. And so one of the people that I think is really just so good about any content they put out having a really actionable quality to it is Lorraine. And if you don't already know Lorraine, I don't know where you have been, but you have clearly not been lingering a lot on LinkedIn, because Lorraine is just an amazing person, one in general, but two, she is a best-selling author. She has multiple LinkedIn learning courses, and when I say best-selling author, it's a very recent new title that she has among many other titles because her book was just released a few weeks ago. It's called Unforgettable Presents. I have one, and then I realized when I woke up this morning that I had already read it, and so it's in Austin. So I did not bring it with me on vacation because I don't travel with books I've already read, but maybe you do. So Lorraine will have to Vanna White the book for us because I usually would Vanna White it, but I don't have it. So I'm really excited to dig into this conversation today because I think a lot of the stuff that she talks about in the book, as well as just her content that she puts out online, is really just actionable things that you can do. And that's the type of content that I love, and hopefully the type of content that you love as well. So, without further ado, please help me welcome Lorraine to our coffee chat.
Hello. What a wonderful intro. Thank you, Kim, for that.
I have to know. I always ask this to people who have just released books, and I feel like it's especially poignant for you because it's your first book. But it seems like committing to a 28-mile marathon. I mean, it just seems like you woke up one day and you're like, the Boston Marathon. That's a good idea for me. Is that kind of what it feels
Exactly.
like?
It is, yeah. I mean, it can feel like when you're in it, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I have to sprint. There's this to do," like right before launch too. But now, if you want it to be sustainable, like I've had authors say, if you're promoting a book well, if it has legs, like this should be going on for a year. So I have to pace myself, I have to, not burn out. And so slowing down a little bit just to keep up the momentum.
Well, and I feel like that's really interesting because I feel like one of the things that obviously you talk about in the book, but also just in general, is, visibility, is, staying visible, showing up. And not only is your book about that, but it sounds like part of the book process is staying visible for, 6 months or a year after the book comes out. And I'm just curious for anybody who's joining us today that is not a natural extrovert, that sort of it feels very either introverted or being around people sort of exhausts them or it doesn't sound very like much fun to them.
Yeah.
How could they navigate? Like they might just look at you and say like, well, she's special. That's not me. I could never do that.
Hello to my fellow introverts in the audience. I am an introvert and I'm doing this thing. Um, to your point, it can get tiring. I think a lot of it is knowing yourself and knowing your limitations and your energy management. So for example, yes, I can be on podcasts, but I'm not going to stack 5 podcast interviews in a day. I'm going to maybe do 2 max. If I hit 3, I'm super tired. And so knowing like how you operate and like what you can handle, I think is really important. And I think the great thing about a book launch is, a lot of it does happen virtually and like in written LinkedIn posts. And you don't have to necessarily be on in that way when you're promoting. It can be something said in your newsletter, a LinkedIn post, whatever the channel you want to use. So there are avenues that you can lean on that played more to your strengths.
I love that you brought that up because that was going to be one of my questions is that I
Mhm.
feel like when people just kind of hear the word visibility, so much of it seems like it has to be in person or the camera's on or the screen is on. And really when you highlight in the book is visibility so much more than that. So I'd love to hear kind of your take on it and really where you think most people kind of go wrong, where they zig and you're like, no, no, you could really zag over here.
No, I think it really comes down to what is presence, and this is why I wrote the book. So when we hear the word presence, I think, Kim, you can let me know what you think, but I think a lot of people think executive presence, right? Like I think that's what comes to mind first. And then when you think of executive presence, there's a lot of things wrapped up in that, right? There's a lot of maybe coded language. It usually means, oh, or people think it means like, oh, I'm of a certain seniority level. It's for those really high stakes situations when I'm in the boardroom. And executive presence is really just one piece of the presence pie or the presence puzzle, as I like to say. And presence is really both about how you're seen, but also where you're seen. And I feel like what you're touching on, Kim, is that where piece, where there are so many different places where our presence can be built. It's not just that one big moment, but all these smaller moments that happen throughout a day, whether we are leading a meeting, even that message that we send in the Slack channel, right? And our profile in Slack, like all these little pieces are part of our presence. And we want to make sure that we're not just showing up in this one place, but showing up in all the right places, which also includes, platforms like LinkedIn. So when you think about it more that way, visibility becomes, I think, just much more approachable, like, it's something that we can all tackle. We just have to be intentional about it.
And I feel like it's that intentionality that really can make the big difference because, I think sometimes people do like uh, I call it like the spray and pray, where all of a sudden, like, they'll be super bombastic on whether it's LinkedIn or social media or like they're kind of all over the place, or at least in my business, like all of a sudden start to get a lot of email updates from like vendors and stuff.
Yeah,
And then it'll kind of ghost and because it's not sustainable or it's not something that actually comes naturally to them. So
yeah.
how does someone figure out, I guess, which bucket they fall into or which the type works for them? Like when you are like consulting, I know you do some like big group speeches, but also some like individual kind of smaller session work with your consulting that you've done in the past. Like, how do you help guide people to kind of figure out what works or, and really more so than that, what's sustainable?
I think it's important to first figure out where are the people who you need to influence or who needs to see your work. Because hard work, unfortunately, it's not enough. I learned that the hard way. And so, I'll share the story. When I was at Prezi, I got promoted to director. And right after my promotion, I got added to the Slack channel. And the Slack channel was titled Senior Leaders. And pretty much everyone from director up was in that channel. So directors, VPs, the CEO. And I had no idea that this channel existed. And so I think first and foremost, you have to figure out where are the important people, who needs to see your work, and make sure that you are showing up in those places. So whether it is a Slack channel, I also published a weekly newsletter with what my team did, and that went to the whole company intranet. So you want to, again, like you said, Kim, like not spray and pray, but figure out, okay, what are the strategic spots that I need to show up? And then beyond that, again, figure out what works best for you. So if I'm an introvert and I prefer writing versus just raising my hand and sharing a thought in the meeting, then let me find those avenues. Is it email? Is it the Slack channel? Like, where are people? And so I think thinking about it more strategically like that can be helpful because, like you said, like it can be overwhelming. There are so many places that we can show up now, especially like distributed, remote, hybrid, like all these different options.
I'd love to hear. I mean, obviously, in that example you gave, like you were invited to the Slack channel. So then you're like, oh my gosh, this Slack channel
Yeah.
exists.
Yeah.
I had no idea. But I love this point from Giacomo, which is, let's say that you are 2 or 3 degrees separated from the CEO. Like you're not quite at the director level. Let's say you have a boss or a boss's boss, there's some level, but you know that one day you would like to work under the CEO or maybe on a special project with him or her. How can you get your work or get yourself in front of people that maybe you're not dealing with at work on a day-to-day basis, or maybe you're virtual and they're in an office, or vice versa, you're in an office and they live in another country? What advice do you have when it comes to people you don't interact with on a daily basis?
I appreciate the question from Giacomo, and I saw your comment yesterday. So, hello, good to see you live. What I would say is it sounds like really obvious advice, but first and foremost, you have to let at least your manager know that that is your goal. Because I think so many
Mm.
of us assume, and this was me as well, like we assume, oh, my manager knows I want to get promoted, or my manager knows I want this, or my manager will put me up for this conversation or suggest that this conversation happens when they think I'm ready or when I've been here long enough or when I've proven myself. And so much of it boils down, again, we talk about intentionality and I talk about being the CEO of your career in the book, like taking charge and figuring out, okay, what is it I want and how can I get that? How can I go after it? So let your manager know that, you want to get promoted or that you want to meet someone, and they can hopefully help facilitate that or give you tips. Oh, this is the best way to talk to them, or this is how they like to have these sorts of conversations. And then you shouldn't be afraid to do a skip level meeting. So in tech, this is when you don't speak to your manager, but you speak to your manager's manager to get to know them. So give your manager a heads up so they don't feel like you're going behind their back or anything, but you can let them know, hey, like it's my goal to be more visible in the company and to meet more people and to let my work be known by these important people. So I would like to set up a skip level meeting with this person, and then you figure it out. And does your manager have advice for how to approach that meeting? Because it's their manager and they'll have a better idea of who they are as a person. But taking the initiative to set up those calls, make sure you come prepared with something you want to share, maybe some insights, maybe some questions, right? You don't want to just show up and say like, hey, this is kind of a vague, 30-minute meeting. But I think, taking that initiative and figuring out the right people to reach out to, that's never a bad thing. It's a good thing.
I love this point. So juicy
Yeah.
about talking to your boss and letting your boss know. And I forget who gave me this tip, but I still use it to this
Yeah.
day, which is whether it's a boss or somebody, whatever, put it after you have that discussion, put it in writing via email, because
Yeah.
a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm happy to connect you, or oh, in a conversation, yeah, yeah, yeah. But then there's no written. And then if you ask them in 6 months, like, hey, you said you were going to, introduce me, they'll be like, I never said that. Or like, I don't remember us having that discussion. And you, like a little detective Nancy Drew, can be like,
Yeah.
actually, on January 10th, we had a whole conversation and here's my email, like follow up about it. And I thought, especially if you're in corporate, that was really interesting because if and when it ever comes to you like leaving or departing from that company and your
Yeah.
boss or somebody is like, why are you leaving, you can always say, well, here, over the course of a year and a half, I asked 6 times
Yeah.
to whatever, further my development, whatever, and y'all kind of ignored it. So like I'm out. And
Yeah.
I think that that really helps kind of give you a lot of leverage. So I love that. I think that that is so, so important.
Yeah, and I love what you said too. I mean, the importance of the follow-up. Again, like you can take the initiative to ask, but make sure that you are closing the loop and make sure that you're not, again, leaving things to chance. Your manager is so busy. They are dealing with your career, their career, the rest of the team's career, managing up to their manager. And so not just saying it once, but respectfully multiple times is really important to make sure that they do remember.
Well, absolutely. And I love what Kelly is saying here, this idea of like a skip level meeting,
Yes.
really giving time. And I will say that that's definitely something that that term very much depends on what industry you're in.
Yeah.
But now that you know it, Kelly, and everybody else, you should definitely be using it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love this point from James, which is really, you know, if you yourself are not introverted, but you know that somebody else on your team or somebody else in the group maybe needs a little more support in speaking up or getting heard or making sure that their presence is known. How do you think about approaching this without also putting them on the spot and I guess having them like a turtle go further into
Yeah.
their hole, like, oh, James just called me out in the meeting and now I feel even more unprepared or upset.
Yeah, that is an introvert's worst nightmare to call them on the spot in a meeting. So we need more leaders like James who are being very thoughtful about including the introverts. So, oh gosh, there's so many ideas I can think of. So, I think the first one, first and foremost, is anytime you set a meeting, making sure that you have the agenda because introverts, they love to prepare, they love to know what's coming up. So if you can be very explicit about, at this point, for the first 10 minutes, we're going to talk about this. Then we're going to talk about this for the next 15 minutes and this and this and this. And so they know what to prepare for. And then invite them in, right? Like, oh, I'm an introvert and I see that we're talking about business priorities at this time. And I might say, oh, James, like I have something that I want to say at that point. So make it very clear that you're okay with sort of adding them into the agenda ahead of time. So again, that they can prepare. So I think that's really helpful. And then I interviewed someone named H. Walker in the book. He's the vice president of the Boys and Girls Club of America. And he said that what he does is he provides a lot of different channels for people to participate. And so he'll say, okay, you don't necessarily have to speak up in the meeting, but you can email me over the next 24 hours, or you can chat me before I'm going to leave this forum open and that forum open. And what it does is it helps people feel more comfortable so that in those moments where perhaps it makes sense to speak up in a meeting, they already know you've created such a supportive environment that they're willing to perhaps make themselves a little bit uncomfortable, in those specific situations. But I think really, again, providing the different avenues and the different channels and not always thinking that someone has to respond in that moment because you're going to get more thoughtful responses from the introverts if you give them a little bit more time to think.
And I think that's such a good way to look at it as well, because one of the things that you talk about in the book is your RAVE model with the E being expertise. And like what that reminds me of, and what I think is good for everybody to keep in mind is the way that your expertise shows up is not the way somebody else's shows up. So if your, way of showing off your expertise is you are very talkative and
Yeah.
you are very on the spot and you are very like, let's talk it out on the phone, that might not be somebody else's way of showing their expertise. They might do better when in long form, like type,
Yeah.
or they might do better in like an async style communication when they have time to think about it. And so I think that that's a really kind of important reminder is that not all expertises show up the same way.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, even the extroverts, like doing things that help introverts can still help you get the best ideas from the extroverts. So there's this concept, but we all know what a brainstorm is, right? Where you're saying ideas aloud, you maybe have like a whiteboard behind you, you're jotting down ideas. The best way to actually get ideas from your team is through this concept called brain writing. And what that is
Mm.
you're writing down ideas in silence by yourself or asynchronously before your meeting. And then you bring the ideas together. So it's less like on the fly, I'm speaking up, just whatever comes to my mind, but I'm actually being thoughtful and taking some time. And so strategies like that, incorporating that into your meetings, helps introverts and really the extroverts as well.
Yeah, I think anything that you can do also to just like mix up a meeting. I mean, we've all been in meetings. I know for a while, like the hot thing a couple years ago was to do standing meetings,
Uh,
back when not everybody was virtual, but like that was like the cool thing was like, we're
yeah,
gonna do a standing meeting, instead of sitting around. But I think anything that you can do to kind of shake up your meetings or do things differently is always a good sort of brain
mhm.
exercise to make sure that everybody's still showing up.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
For your RAVE model specifically, how did you come up with that framework or what led you to kind of categorize things in that way?
I love a good framework. As you saw Kim in the book, I have many, many frameworks, many acronyms. And so for me, I knew that the RAID model is to help you build influence at work. And so for me, I just sat down and I was like, what does go into influence? Because influence can feel like kind of this nebulous term. Like, when you see someone in the office, you're like, oh, they're influential, like everyone knows them, they're making things happen, right? But it's not always clear how to get there. So RAVE stands for relationships, appearances, visibility, and expertise. And yeah, when I thought through it, I was like, these are the four things that I think are really critical to building influence, really essential building blocks. So that's how I came up with it.
Which part do you feel like people, I guess, struggle with the most? Or
Mm,
which part when you are doing one of these presentations, I know you said later today you're going to Google, which is
yeah.
exciting for like a fireside chat, but like when you are with these groups, where do you feel like even though you're talking to people that are smart and exceptional and obviously they're very
Mhm.
talented because they're at
Yeah.
these really great wonderful companies, but even they struggle with like this one part.
Ooh, I think, sometimes it depends on the group. I would say though overall, the visibility piece. That is really hard because so many of us, I mean, we're hard workers, we execute well, and really the book is talking to those folks who are mid-career. They are, they're ambitious, they're wanting to become that senior leader, to be seen differently in people's eyes. And pretty much everything that got you to that middle point is hard work, doing good work, executing well, right? But to get to that senior level, it's a whole different set of skills that we're not really taught. So I think and visibility, very much goes into that. There's an art to it and it's a skill, right? It's not just I'm talking about my work, but how am I talking about it strategically and connecting it to company goals and being smart about how I'm positioning things. So I would say the visibility is probably the hardest piece.
And I love this question from Dave when we're thinking
Mm,
about that visibility part, especially, which is, we've kind of been talking in terms of your current job, or maybe getting the job that you want to have. But Dave brings up a really good point that, you also want to make sure that you leave an impression in a job interview, which obviously is a very condensed amount of time. You kind of got to wow them in
yeah,
30 minutes or
yeah,
it's like reminds me of like an elevator pitch or something where they're
yeah.
like sell us your business, go, you have 30 seconds and you're like ah! But you have this condensed 15-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute window. How do you stand out or how do you leave like a lasting impression?
Okay, Dave, I have so many ideas. Okay, let me think of my favorite. So the first one that I want you to think about is how you're showing up on camera. I assume that most interviews these days happen virtually, so making sure that you have good lighting, you have the right framing. In my book, I talk about something called the T method, TEA. These are the first things that you need to do whenever you get on camera to make sure that you are showing up professionally. And then when you know you're showing up professionally, you're also going to feel more confident, and that's going to come across on the screen as well. So that's the first thing I would do. The second thing that comes to mind is, like you said, Kim, we have such a short amount of time to make an impression and also create a connection with the other person. And so I talk about in the book turning off autopilot small talk. And that is when you get on a
Mm.
call and you can pretty much assume and predict how the conversation is going to play out. So, hi, Kim, how are you? I'm good. How are you doing? Great. Okay, let's get started. Right. And like we haven't learned anything about each other. And so if you can break out of that and turn small talk into more strategic conversation, because small talk is actually very powerful for helping us connect with each other. I think that will make you stand out. And so again, like it kind of all ties in together. So as you think about your aesthetics and how you come across on camera, you can start putting things in the background, right? That makes someone else notice and maybe call it out. And then that creates conversation, right? So for my background, for example, someone might ask about the book. I get a lot of questions about the caricature with my husband. And so that creates more conversation. And Dave, on the other end, you look in their background. Like if I get on this call with Kim, I mean, the first thing I notice is like, Kim, where are you? Like, this is not your normal setting. And so, again, it doesn't have to be a long part of the conversation, but a minute or two, just to try to find that connection and get to know each other a little bit.
And Dave, I'll add, I'll brag on Lorraine for a little bit, which is she really knows what she's talking about when we talk about visuals and presentations, because she worked at Prezi, which, if you've heard of that company, is literally all about, how you show up on Zoom and how you show up on Teams and all of these various internet connected ways of connecting with people. And you do talk about that in the book as well, which I think, in today's world, a lot of us are on Zoom the majority of the time. Like I know for me, kind of, pre 2020, maybe 85% was in person, and 15% was virtual. And now it is the complete opposite. And now actually I'm begging some of my clients to meet them in person. In fact, I just sent an email this morning being like, hey, like, can we grab breakfast next week? And I have a distinct feeling that this client is going to be like, no, I'm good. Like I'll just see you on the weekly call. And I'm going to be like, okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, to your point again, like so much of our first impression and sometimes only impression happens virtually. So that's why again, presence is not just about that in person anymore. We have to think about all the touch points that people have with us because we are leaving an impression in all these places.
What do you think of Craig's point? I think this is funny that in a job interview, you ask them, when do you want me to start? Does that leave an impression?
It does. I think it shows that you're confident. I mean, I don't know if this is like in a joke, like how jokey you are with it. But I think, yeah, you again, you build the rapport. If it goes well, I think asking a question like that kind of playfully can be a great thing.
Oh, I love this question from Darius because it seems super nuanced, which is for anybody who's joining us that would consider themselves like a natural kind of connector or mediator in the workplace where you're kind of gathering people together, or maybe you're kind of saying, Tiffany, you have this great idea, and I think it would make sense for what Sarah's working on. You're kind of naturally kind of connecting the dots at your company or in your industry. Could
Mhm.
that be, or is there a way to spin that or expand on that so that people really see it as influence and not just, oh, Darius or Kim or whoever, you know is really easy to get along with?
Mhm. I think it can certainly be a big part of influence. And I feel like this touches on the R, the relationships, and the E, expertise. And so I think sometimes we underestimate how powerful relationships are when it comes to influencing. Influencing inherently involves other people, right? We have to influence someone. And so, Darius, like if you are someone who's known as the person everyone likes, a person who can bring calm and peace to those tension-filled, situations, that's going to go a long way. That's going to be part of your brand and what you're known for. And I think that's a very powerful thing.
Yeah, I would also just add that, there are so many ways that your influence can show up. And I actually think that in some ways this is the most powerful
Mhm.
because I mean, everybody knows this, that nobody wants to work with like a meanie pants. Like no
Yeah.
one wants to work with a bully. No one wants to work with the guy who's like Eeyore, with like a
Yeah.
rain cloud over him all the time.
Yeah.
You want to work with happy, fun, positive people.
Yeah.
And so, showing up, it's like, be the change you wish to see in the world. Showing up as a teammate that you would like to have does mean that your boss or, hopefully those senior leaders around you say like, well, let's call Darius in. Like he's game for trying anything. And I think that I know for me, not only being that person, but also being ready for those opportunities. I learned such a valuable lesson. I was probably 22 years old, very first job in New York City. I was working at Condé Nast, which is a big magazine publishing house here in the US. And my boss gave me like the best advice in the first couple weeks. We had on Fridays, you could kind of do like casual Friday, you could wear
Okay. Yeah.
jeans. And like the first couple Fridays, I wore jeans because
Yeah.
hello, it's casual Friday. But I noticed that she never wore jeans. And she said to me, she said, "You can keep doing casual Friday. Like, that's fine. Like, all the other assistants are doing it. All the other kind of mid-level marketing managers were doing it." But she said, "I'm never going to take you to a meeting if you're wearing jeans." By the way, I was never getting invited to meetings in the first place, so, like, the odds of this were very small.
Sure.
But I did stop wearing jeans, and, like, months and months and months and months later, basically, like, the person that was kind of, between me and, like, my real boss, this kind of marketing manager, she got food poisoning, puking everywhere, couldn't come to work, and my boss was going to a meeting, and I think she kinda just wanted, like, another body in the
Sure.
room, like, kind of like, "Oh, it's me and, my marketing manager," or this case, me and my assistant, and
Yeah.
it was a Friday, and I got to go to the meeting. But if I had been wearing jeans, I don't think she would have taken me. And
Yeah.
so it's not only being that person, but the valuable lesson that I learned is you can make yourself visible all day long, but then when you finally do get picked,
Mm.
you ought to be ready to, like,
Yeah.
get picked.
Yeah.
You gotta
Yeah.
be on the spot and know what that's about, and I think that like, some of your advice of, like, coming with an agenda or always having questions prepared, like, that's part of that. Because when you
Mhm.
do get picked or it is your turn to speak or it is your chance to show up, you know, you gotta show up with something good.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that story. I'm glad you got invited to the meeting eventually.
I mean, it took months, and if that girl
Yeah.
hadn't been barfing, I definitely would
Yeah.
not have been invited, but,
Yeah.
one man's barf is another man's treasure, so it worked out for me, so that was easy. Um, I love this point as well. This is great. Being a busy mom of a special needs child, virtual meetings are a godsend, and looking our best is so key. I love this, Hiromi. Where, like, Lorraine, can you give us a few more tips of showing up virtually and how we can improve that?
Definitely. So, yes, this is the A of appearances in the RAVE model, but also I'll talk to the T method here. It is really important to look good on camera. I think what happened during COVID is we got so relaxed being at home, and I'm guilty of this too, where I'm like, I'm in my random like startup t-shirts, and I'm just like, I'm at home, just really relaxed. But then, we kind of got used to it. I'm like, okay, you want to, again, like you said, Kim, like not, this is like the version of like not showing up in jeans in the office, like a little bit of a nicer shirt, like it will change how others perceive you and how you possibly feel on camera too. I know like when I was in a t-shirt all the time, I felt just different, right? Like just not as professional. Um, and so there's a few things that I think are important. So not just looking good, but the T part, the tech is also really critical. Now, you don't have to have a whole full-blown podcast setup and spend like thousands of dollars, but I think people underestimate that. So having a good camera will make you look better. Having a good microphone will make you sound better, right? Like we've all been in those calls that are kind of choppy and it's just so hard to hear the person. I mean, that other person's not going to have a great impression of you. We've seen people who are in the dark rooms and they're not well lit. Again, you're like, what are they hiding? Like they don't seem very confident. Like what's that about? And so focusing on those aspects as well can help. I think some other things to consider: avoid striped tops or pattern tops. If you can experiment later, it will look like it is moving on camera. It's due to something called the moire pattern. So check that out. And having like jewel tones or colors that pop more on camera, I think is also a good thing. If it's like an important client presentation, for example, having some colors to make you stand out on camera, I think can be a nice touch as well.
And I always tell people to practice if it is something important like a job interview or it is something important like a big marketing presentation that you have to do, to practice in whatever it is you're going to be wearing. Because sometimes you don't realize, natural movements that you made or ticks. Or my friend told me this really embarrassing story once that she had done a virtual job interview. She was wearing this blouse. Long story short, as the interview went on, she could see herself in the camera starting to sweat, and like the pit stains were like growing. I mean, we laughed about it.
Okay.
I definitely laughed because it wasn't me.
Yeah.
But I say all that because I think, you know, people will say things like, oh, you should practice. Okay, fine. But
Yeah.
I always say, like, practice how you're going to show up, because had my friend practiced, maybe it wouldn't have
Yeah.
mattered, but maybe she would have
Sure.
noticed, like, hey, this blouse on camera, like, you can really see, like, I'm starting to sweat and it's showing up.
Yeah.
So I feel like actually practicing in that is also helpful.
Yeah, that's a great call. And then also you kind of alluded to this, but recording yourself because we do all when we're nervous have presentation tics. And so mine, I usually stand to give sessions, but I would be like rocking back and forth. Notice when you're sitting, this is like the equivalent people on calls swiveling. So you don't want that. That's very distracting. So avoid that.
I love this question about lighting and audio tools. I brought this down. Where is it? Because I had a feeling we were going to get a question like this. And I just wanted to show that, by the way, I stole this from my husband, that even because I'm using mine, even when you are traveling, these little Logitechs, I don't know what they call. We got this at Best Buy. I don't know, Shelby. It was
There
like
you go.
$50 or 75 bucks. Oh yeah, yeah. Um,
It's not
you
too
can pack this
expensive.
in a
Yeah.
suitcase.
Mhm.
I stole it off his computer. But these are easy ways to make sure that even when you're traveling, you're not so this one is a Logitech, but I don't know if you have any kind of favorites or brands that are really your go-tos.
Yeah, so I have a tools checklist guide in my book that you can all access, lots of extra resources. But I do also use a Logitech Brio, which I think is the one that you just showed. I
Yeah.
have a microphone. It's the brand Fifine. Not expensive. It's not even like the fanciest microphone out there. Just something from Amazon. Because again, I don't want to be spending like I don't think I need to be spending thousands of dollars to have a nice setup. So, I just did this TV interview the other day, and initially the sound was or the microphone was my laptop. And then I said, "Oh, is there a way to switch to the external mic?" We figured it out and she could hear. She's like, "Oh, the sound is much better." So it does make a difference.
It makes a huge difference, and James and some people in the chat are also saying, like, ring lights or I mean, absolutely, there's definitely a bunch of different things that you can do and look at over and over again, and, you know, one of the things that I think is an important reminder when it comes to this stuff, and another reason why I think your book is a really great not only for yourself, but as a gift to somebody else. I know graduation is here,
Yeah.
so if anybody has any young graduates that are going out to the world. I also think that this is really important for them to have. And it's something important for us to continue to reread and to revisit, because we all, to your point about the t-shirt, you know, we all get a little lazy, or like you're wearing a collared shirt for the first 6 weeks after a
Yeah.
session like this because you're feeling, you know,
Yeah.
motivated and the gas tank's full and you're, you know, but then after a while the gas tank starts to lower onto empty. And so I think kind of having these reminders is really important. And besides, you know, someone kind of picking up your book, obviously, and rereading it, what are, do you think, some good ways or good habits that they can set up? Like, is it a quarterly check-in with themselves or twice a year? Or, you know, how do you think that people can, I guess, keep themselves honest on like the message of the book?
I think feedback is really critical here and having so I talk about this concept of a feedback circle in the book and it can be, internal at a company, it can be external. But figure out what your goals are, how you're trying to come across, and then go to those people. Those are people who really care about you succeeding, who want to be honest with you. Sometimes people are just too nice with feedback and they don't tell you the truth, right? So you want people who are willing to tell you how it is because they care about you. And so finding those trusted people, whether it's a small group within your company, maybe it's a bunch of people you've met outside of work, and going to them and you figure out the cadence that works for you. But hey, how do I look on camera? Or can you watch this recording of me presenting? Like I'm trying to appear, more confident and use fewer filler words. Like, do you feel like I succeeded in that? And so turning to them, I think it's always helpful. We don't work in a vacuum, right? It's just so relationship based. So to have that group of people. I also talk about this concept in the book called mentor moments. So I think sometimes for us, like mentorship, you can be like, oh my gosh, like who am I going to ask? I have to write the best message to get them, to get them to mentor me, and it has to be this like formalized thing. But sometimes it's just, hey, I've built a relationship with this person, and I know that if I reach out with a question, like they'll be willing to help me. And so finding, again, like figuring out what works for you, finding those people, and hopefully not putting too much pressure on yourself that it has to be such a formalized thing.
Exactly. It definitely doesn't have to be formal. And when you're thinking about these people, whether it's people that you know right now or people that you want to know, I'm curious for you,
Mhm.
are there some people that you follow on LinkedIn or maybe follow on other social media channels that, you really inspire you or that you really kind of enjoy consuming their content? Because I know, you know, obviously like you can tell after reading the book, whether it's Daniel Pink or Kim Scott, that you're a fan, and
Yeah.
your work kind of is symbiotic with these other great leaders. But who are some other leaders that you follow or you kind of consume their content that you're like, oh yeah, this is like good stuff?
I feel like it's like everyone I I interviewed in the book, honestly, and more, right? So like you mentioned, like I interviewed 3 dozen leaders, and so some of them are C-suite, at Fortune 500 companies. Some of them are content creators. Some of them are, best-selling authors, keynote speakers, all of the above. And so, I'll call it a few names, but honestly, it's just like I don't even know how to choose. But you mentioned Dan Scott, they're excellent. Vanessa Van Edwards is a mutual friend, and I was so happy to have her in the book. Vin Zhang is very active on LinkedIn. He's a communications expert. Love his insights. Corporate Natalie, Corporate Natalie fans in the audience? Like she's amazing. So I can't even name them all. You just have to read the book, but it's like so many good insights from all of them. Over 140 insights.
Tons, just jam packed. I love this question from Giacomo. Besides your book, what are some other books that you're reading right now, or maybe they're on your to be read, your TBR list, as the kids say, that you're excited about?
So I just finished reading Wild Courage by my friend Jenny Wood. Managing Up by Melody Wilding is another one on my list. Um, I see the question about the podcast. Think Fast, Talk Smart podcast is wonderful. I just listened to a great episode. Also, I had the honor of being interviewed just a few weeks ago, so I encourage you all to check that out. And Reverse the Search by Madeline Mann, also on my docket.
Yeah, I feel like, whether it's books or podcasts or audiobooks, like as much as you can surround yourself with good content, especially when you're walking the dog or doing the dishes, that sort of stuff, even if you're kind of half listening to it, I
Yeah,
find that I like to think that like subliminally my brain is absorbing it, even if I'm like missing parts of the sentences,
sure.
because our brains are very smart. We don't even know how they all work. So,
Yeah, I'm trying to do more of it. I have to admit, like, I'm not the best at listening to podcasts, but like to your point, like there's just so much goodness out there. I need to listen to more. Read more,
I
listen more,
know.
do all the things. Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to, like, pack it all in. That's why I feel
Yeah.
like, getting recommendations from people is always, like, my best form because I feel like
Yeah.
they're kind of like I have a handful of friends that are, like, really voracious readers,
Nice.
and so I kind of feel like they're like my screeners. Like, I'm like, "Oh, you
Yeah,
read
thanks for
3 books
that.
this week, so if it made it
Yeah.
through your gauntlet, then, like, it's good enough for me."
Nice. Okay, very impressive. Yeah, no, everyone needs like that recommender, right? The person who's just consuming everything.
Exactly, exactly. Okay. As you know, around these parts, we are super nerdy and we love homework assignments. So I'd love to know, in terms of really kind of boosting our presence and showing up as our best selves, what is a bit of homework advice that you would give to us to do the rest of the week, over the weekend, or
I would say that it's really important. It's a small thing you can do, but has big impact to improve your small talk. And so break away from those autopilot questions that are, how are you? I mean, you can still ask, how are you? But follow it up with something, right? So not just how are you? And then that conversation ends, but oh, what was the highlight of your weekend? Or what do you have coming up this weekend? Or what were you most excited, about that all hands meeting we just watched? Like, what did you find interesting about it? What did you find exciting? So leaning into strategic small talk, not just autopilot small talk, I think will go a long way in helping you build those relationships, building confidence, and just getting ahead faster at work. I think Kim just, her internet went out. Looks like she's in the middle of nature in Colorado, so maybe that's part of it. All right. Well, I don't know if Kim's going to be able to get back on, but thank you all so much for joining today. It was wonderful to see so many familiar names, some new names. Encourage you all to check out my book. Really appreciate all your support there, and reach out to me on LinkedIn with any questions, any follow-ups. For my fellow introverts who need a little bit more time to think about their questions, would love to hear from you. And thank you all again. Wonderful to see you.